Local law firm Bowmans has released its annual report on executive pay trends in a number of African countries, tracking Kenya, Mauritius, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania and Zambia, and highlights the importance of disclosure and transparency for listed companies when it comes to executive pay. Well, to unpack some of the trends for us, I'm joined in studio by Norma Mazibuko. She is the Executive Rewards Consultant at Bowmans. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Nompu. Thank you for having me.
Super. So tell us about some of the trends that you saw coming out of the African countries that you looked at when it comes to executive pay.
Nompu, I think it's very encouraging that there's growing alignment in the African continent with your developed markets. And this is really by way of your executive share plans, your executive employee share ownership plans, in addition to your single incentives, your ESG provisions, malus and clawback. So the governance is quite robust.
Yeah. So you make reference to this concept or these concepts of callus and clawback provisions that are made, in executive incentive packages. Just explain what those are, because I think that's quite important.
Certainly. So these are your risk management provisions to ensure that executives are held accountable. And malus provisions refer to recouping your incentives prior to them being paid out, versus your clawback is recouping the incentives after they have vested and they've been paid back. And this is really due to your misconduct, financial misstatements, adverse behavior and reputational damage, to mention a few.
So you also note that some countries are less open than others among the 6 countries that you look at when it comes to the disclosure and the transparency around executive pay. Just speak to us a little bit about that and why it's so important for transparency to take place in the first place.
Indeed. So the research has revealed that in the South market area, the disclosure is quite onerous, versus your West Africa regions, which is less onerous, and East Africa being somewhere in the middle. This becomes important because if you're looking at foreign investment, they need that comfort that Africa is a stable market, ease of doing business, and well-governed and regulated. So to attract and stimulate this foreign investment, creation of employment and attraction of key talent, disclosure becomes quite key from a REM perspective.
And why is it also important, from a shareholder perspective, for people to be able, ordinary investors, to be able to see what is happening? Because obviously we know that people can vote for or against pay packages, but ultimately there's not actually, you're not bound by shareholder voting to actually go through with what they voted for. But why is it important for them to participate?
So it's important because, one, if you're looking at a balanced and stable market, it's important from a transparency perspective. Shareholders need to have the comfort that there is alignment between pay and performance, and all the pay practices and these executive packages are indeed aligned to shareholder value and meeting the company objectives.
And then ESG, environment, social governance, has been like the buzz word or buzz acronym for many years now. I understand that's also very much tied into the pay incentives that are given to CEOs, CFOs, the C-suite.
Absolutely, Nompu. So what we're seeing now, the prevalence is to include your ESG metrics in addition to your corporate financial targets. So ESG metrics such as your reduction of carbon emissions, increasing the diversity profile, and, for instance, customer satisfaction index. This helps to ensure that whatever bonuses are paid are balanced and based on well-rounded corporate performance targets and not just on the profits. This ensures sustainability in the long term and, of course, your corporate responsible employers.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning of our conversation where you were talking about the different types of incentives that there are, short-term incentives, long-term incentives. Just break those down to us, and how can you be sure that you get the long-term incentives right? Because, of course, you don't have a crystal ball as to how a given company is going to perform.
Yeah. So these are typically linked to the company's strategy and objectives that the company sets for itself and the creation of shareholder value. Long-term incentives are measured over a period that is 3 years or longer, versus your short-term incentives are measured within a single year, ensuring then that through the crystal ball being your corporate performance targets, employees or executives in this instance are then aligned to achieving those particular objectives.
some people have a lot of beef with the issue that, you know, executive pay packages can be quite weighty relative to the man on the ground in the same company who's working. How do you get that balance right in terms of what the man at the top gets paid relative to what the person at the bottom who's actually, you know, taking the rock out of the ground or, you know, running the factory or doing whatever, what they earn?
So this is really an issue of pay parity, and with the recent amendments to the Companies Act, we see a lot of requirements in terms of pay disclosure and particularly measuring that pay gap, wherein you've got a sensible ratio between the highest earners and the lower earning workers. And this is really around ensuring fairness and equity, understanding that the complexity of work for the employees at the top of the house, the executives as it were, will vary vastly across the organizational structure. But of course, it's around ensuring equity and how the packages are structured. And what we're seeing from this particular research being the introduction or the prevalence of your employee share ownership plans are to really supplement the total reward packages such that it's not just about the fixed remuneration, but also including the element of share ownership and equity exposure for your lower earning employees, which is quite similar to your executive share plans, where executive remuneration is largely bulked in the share incentive awards.
Yeah. And then lastly, I suppose part of the reason why people may kind of sniff at what executives get paid is because executives at a certain high level are highly mobile geographically. So that means that they can work in Africa, they can work in Australia or in the United States or whatever. So therefore, the pay needs to be attractive to that kind of candidate, right?
Indeed. So I think those are some of the key findings that have come across from the report, which is available on our website, in that retention of your executive challenge is becoming an issue. So this is the typical war for talent where we are effectively competing with your developed markets. So ensuring that we are able to retain these executives who are able to add and create shareholder value becomes key. And these total reward levers and how the incentives are structured, designed and implemented becomes your strategic levers for your talent retention.
All right. Norma Mazibuko, thank you so much for joining us in studio. She's the Executive Rewards Consultant at Bowmans.